All right, the next thing we're going to look at in section 1.8 is the quadratic formula. This thing works every time, all right? 60% of the time, it works every time. Okay, so what is it? Well, you're looking at it, okay? You just memorize it. You guys have worked with this before. Sometimes it helps if you maybe put a little song to it. So if you have the equation in this form, then x is always equal to what? X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. See, now you might remember that. All right, let's see how this works then with respect to some examples. So, example number 1. Solve by using the quadratic formula. So here's what I like to do. I like to write down what a is equal to. In this case, it's understood 1. B is the coefficient of x, which is negative 4. And c is 1. All right? I will tell you that these answers should be simplified. They should be reduced. They should be specifically in simplest radical form. Please make a note of it. They should be in simplest radical form. Okay? All right. So how do we do this? Well, we have the 3 pieces that we need. And then we know what? X equals negative b, what? Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So it's just plugging in the numbers in the appropriate locations for a, b, and c. That's it. And then simplifying it specifically in simplest radical form. So let's do that now. So what do we get here? Negative times a negative is a positive. So 4 plus or minus the square root of. The quantity of negative 4 squared is 16. Folks, this will always be. B squared will always be positive. All right, always. Okay, then minus what? 4 times 1 times 1 is 4. All over 2 times 1 is 2. So we now have what? We now have 4 plus or minus square root of 12 over 2, right? 16 minus 4 is 12. All right, this is not reduced. So what we have to do is, we have to do a couple things. Let's remember how to put, first of all, this in simplest radical form. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and put this in simplest radical form first. That's your first step, putting the radical in simplest radical form if it is not in that form to begin with. So it's not. Radical 12 is the same as what? 2 radical 3, right? 2 radical 3. How do I know that? Radical 12, same as 2 radical 3. How do I know that? Well, radical 12 is the same as what? Radical 12 is the same as 2 times what? Times 3. It's just a square root. So for every pair of like bases, you pull it out, pull that like base out once in front, and there you go. Simplest radical form. This is something we did in section 1.7. 1.7 was, was a beast. There's a lot going on in section 1.7. Hopefully section 1.8 is more straightforward, I hope. Okay, is this completely simplified though? No. So it's not, because look at the denominator. If you can put this 2 into both of these numbers up on top, don't worry about this anymore. Once you put the radical in simplest radical form, it's locked in. It's set in stone now. Don't look at the radical anymore. Just look at these numbers. They're all even. So they can reduce by 2, right? Okay, so 4 halves is what? 2. 2 over 2 is 1. So those are your final 2 answers. Now in WebAssign, you're going to have to put them in as a separated list. Probably 2 minus radical 3, and then 2 plus radical 3, okay? So just understand how WebAssign is set up and make sure you enter the answers in based upon how they want them to be entered in, okay? All right, that's example number 1. Finish with that one. Moving on to example number 2. All right, so is this in the form we want it to be in? No. So actually what I'm going to do is the same thing I did in the last one. I'm going to keep my quadratic term positive. I just always am in the habit of doing that. It doesn't really matter, especially if you're using the quadratic formula. But when you're factoring, it's going to make your life easier. At least it does my life. So I'm going to move the 8x from the left to the right by subtracting it from both sides. And then I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So there we go. Again, we're going to solve this now by using the ever-popular quadratic formula. So A is 8, B is -8, and C is -3. And then it's just a matter of plugging in the numbers. So x equals what? X equals -b plus or minus the square root of what? B squared minus 4ac. Remember, you're multiplying this string of numbers together, okay? All over 2a. All right. So what do we get? Well, we get the opposite of -8, which is +8, plus or minus the square root of. What is -8 squared? That is 64. Again, guys, you're always going to end up with a positive value when you square your b, okay? And then what do we get? Well, if you need to use your calculator here, then use your calculator. That's fine. So let's see. We have a -4 times 8 times a -3. I'm getting a 96, if you can see that. Okay. So this is actually a plus 96, right? All over 16. I'm going to give you a little hint here. This result is always going to be non-negative in this class. It's not going to be negative, okay? Because we're not dealing with I in this class. All right, so what do we have now? Let's go ahead and add these two values together. Again, you can use your calculator to come up with the sum there. It's 160 all over 16. Now, this is not in simplest radical form. So what steps do we take? The first step is to rewrite the radical in simplest radical form. So let's go ahead and look at this radical 160. Folks, another way to do this, another way to put this 160, or the square root of 160, in simplest radical form, is just to break down 160 into what? Into the product of a perfect square and then whatever else is left over. Do you agree that 160 is the same as 16 times 10? Do you also agree that 16 is a perfect square? So this really means the same as what? It means the same as square root of 16 times square root of 10, which ultimately means what? Square root of 16 is 4 times that, 4 radical 10. Okay, so 4 radical 10 is the simplest radical form of the square root of 160. All right, so that's my next step. I'm going to write down 8 plus or minus this in simplest radical form, which we just came up with right there. All right, once we're to this point, that radical 10 is set. It's not going to change. Look at the numbers in front, okay? I keep them all together. If you want to break this down into two distinct fractions, you can, but I just keep them all together. But with that being said, WebAssign wants you to put it in separately, I believe. So just, you know, handle it whatever is in the most convenient way for you, okay? It doesn't matter to me. Anyway, we have to reduce this, though. So how do we know we can reduce this? Well, look at these three numbers that are not part of the radical, okay? What's the greatest possible factor that would go evenly into all these? That answer would be 4. So you're going to divide every one of these three numbers by 4 to put it in simplified form. So 8 divided by 4 is what? 2. 4 divided by 4 is 1, so 1 radical 10 all over 16. 16 divided by 4 is 4, finished. Again, at WebAssign, you know, you may have to break this down into two fractions, okay? But these are the two correct solutions. If you have any questions with WebAssign, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. I'll do my best to assist you. All right, that takes care of example number 2.